Talk with ReZsaun.
And hello world, and welcome back to Real Talk with ReZsaun, where nothing's off limits. I am your host, and as you guys know, one of the goals of Real Talk with ReZsaun is to shine a light on the great things that are happening right here in the Low Country. I know there's a lot going on in Chicago. I know there's a lot going on in Cleveland. I know that in Seattle, they have the best coffee in all the biggest buildings. But I'm telling you, right here in the Low Country, we have great people doing great things right among us, and we want to honor them. And today I'm geeked. I'm sorry. This is a day for me. This is a moment. So y'all let me nerd out for a second. We have Professor Damon L Fordham. Thank you so much.
Well, it's an honor to be here, actually, because I have followed your work with some of the local people who you've interviewed over the years, and so I'm really honored to be here, and I'm definitely looking forward to this.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now, I'm gonna play the devil's advocate, to act like people don't know who you are. So I'm gonna ask that you introduce yourself to the audience.
Okay. My name is Damon L Fordham. I was born in Spartanburg, South Carolina, adopted and raised in Mount Pleasant. I'm an adjunct professor of history at Charleston Southern University in the Citadel. I'm a local tour guide. I'm the author of 3 books on South Carolina's African American history. I speak all over the place. I have a YouTube channel called The American Storyteller, which is the title of my 4th upcoming book.
Wow.
And I have a one-man show of storytelling of historical events at the City Gallery on 34 Prelude Street, Monday night, October the 1st, 2018, as a part of the Mojo Festival.
Wow. So that's a lot to unpack. And we're going to unpack all those things. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into all of that. Okay. So you said you were born in Spartanburg.
Yes.
You were adopted and brought here.
Correct.
So walk me through that. How did that come to be?
Okay. The essence of it was that this was a time when, unlike today, if you had a child out of wedlock, if you were in certain homes, they didn't play that type of thing. So they put you up for adoption. And the unfortunate thing about that is that they kept the identities of the parents secret from the child. And that caused a lot of adopted people to this day to have a lot of trauma over that. And that's changing now, but this wasn't always the case. So I went through a childhood not knowing. Now the parents who raised me were smart enough to tell me as soon as I was old enough to understand all these things. Because their thing was that they didn't want people telling me this in the streets. But see, here's the thing about that. They were wise in telling me this, because by the time that the people in the street tried to hit me with all that negativity, I was already vaccinated with the positivity of my parents to make me immune to the negativity. You know what I'm saying?
There it is. I love that. So you find out who your parents are?
Yes, in 2000. Unfortunately, they passed on, but I did get a wonderful relationship with my aunts and cousins and such. So, that's going pretty well. But I often make it a point to reach out to adopted adults who are going through these type of issues, because as with anything, you have to go through this stuff to understand what this does to a person's psyche.
Absolutely.
And as a matter of fact, I also have to say that part of the reason why I've done what I've done over the years was that when I was younger, I wanted to be the type of person that would be such that if my biological family were to come across me, that they would have no sensible reason to reject me.
Right.
And so basically that played a lot of it then, but then it came to a point where I saw certain needs that needed to be met among humanity. And that became my motivation, to where I've been teaching for about 20 years. And a lot of younger people who I've taught over the years, they've come to me and told me that they've learned and were inspired by various things that I'd long forgotten about over the years.
Right.
And so knowing that you're playing a hand in the development of young people, especially in the fact that we have to admit something. We are not living in intelligent times. Pure and simple, because you see, as you know, you have a lot of young people who did not have the home influence that was commonplace once upon a time. They may not have the community influence that was commonplace once at a time, and they sure don't have the national leadership that you had once upon a time. That, you know, when I was a little boy, I would hear Martin Luther King on the sermons on the radio, and before I was old enough to understand what he was saying, I would be mesmerized by the clarity and dignity of his voice, and I would practice speaking in the mirror to that. And the young people today, unless they were cognizant of President Obama while he was president, they don't know what it is to deal with that, you see. And you had, and also in times of crisis, false prophets do well. And as we know, over the past few years, there's been a plethora of these people who have played on the negative emotions of the masses of people to make notoriety and a small fortune for themselves, but do nothing for the people in return.
Wow.
And there's so much misinformation out on the internet. And causing all this confusion, that what I try to do with my YouTube channel is to bring some clarity to the subject. And I try to do it without bashing a lot of these individuals who I think that are frauds and fakers, because, you know, because in essence, what I'm trying to do with a lot of this stuff is to light a candle instead of cursing the darkness.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great way to put that. And I never actually heard it put that way, but I love that. Let's talk about lighting a candle as an educator.
Right.
You're from Spartanburg, born in Spartanburg.
Correct.
Moved to Mount Pleasant.
Well, I was raised in Mount Pleasant. My parents who raised me were from Mount Pleasant.
Okay.
I was adopted through the state.
Okay. So you raised up in Mount Pleasant.
Right.
How does one become a professor from that?
Okay.
That sounds, I know it's a pretty long road. I don't want you to go through.
No. That's all right. That's all right. Well, see, first of all, my mother was a nurse and my dad was a teacher. Okay. My dad taught at Lang High, which was the black high school in Mount Pleasant. It's now a middle school. So I had that kind of role model as a child, and he indulged the fact that I loved to read. See, when everybody thought I was weird because I was so unathletic and awkward, he indulged me wanting to be intelligent, reading and all of that. And so I progressed along those lines. And then after he died, when I was at the University of South Carolina, there was Dean Willie Harriford of the Black Studies Department, who saw that I would come into his class and just sort of knock things out and take tests and leave in about 5 minutes and that sort of thing, whereas other people struggled with that. And he encouraged me to make a career out of this, since I had a genuine love for what I was doing, because the type of things that he taught in his class were things that I was reading for fun. And so this is the key thing here. You have to find, first of all, at a certain age, you know what you enjoy doing. And the key is to find people who are doing what you were doing and have them show you the ropes to become successful in this. And that's what Dean Harriford did for me. So fast forward to some years, my mother's health took a turn for the worse, and I had to leave the University of South Carolina. I came here. Then I started writing for a newspaper called the Coastal Times that James Clyburn was over. And I started doing some Black history programs on WPAL, which used to be the black station here. And this led to Dr. Marvin Delaney, who was then at the College of Charleston and over the Avery Institute. He hired me to be a researcher. And then I got into the master's program there, and that's how I became a teacher.
Wow. So you graduated from Carolina?
Yes.
Okay, and you got your master's from
COC,
College of Charleston. Okay, I'm a College of Charleston Cougar myself.
Good.
So go Cougs. So yeah, I mean, you got to do it. I'm sorry, you got to do it.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. You know, I go Cox every now and then.
I see you. So you got into working at the college as a researcher while you were getting your master's degree.
Correct.
And then how do you go from, like, did you just go straight into teaching, or was there something that happened between that?
Well, Dr. Delaney had me as an adjunct for his classes, and then I became a full adjunct after that.
Okay, cool.
And so for a number of years I did that, and I had some other jobs in the historical field, you know, working as a docent at various places. And So I also did a stint as as an adult teacher with the Tribal Literacy Association. At one point, I taught for 3 years at the Charleston County Jail.
Wow.
I got 28 inmates to get their GEDs.
Wow.
Over a 3-year period. And I learned a lot from that experience in particular. And a number of interesting things happened from that. I took a lot of people who had no belief in themselves whatsoever and convinced them that they were able to get a high school education.
Agreed. Yeah.
And they managed to do so.
Wow. That's an amazing. That's an amazing resume, and we haven't even gotten to your books or your one-man show yet. So I just want to just take a second to really process that for myself. That's so many things that people don't believe in many cases to be possible. Black professor. Go back to the prisons and teach there. Reach to those people. Come from an adopted state to find your own self. And that shows that no matter where you come from, there's definitely...
Well, I had help in finding my feet, people.
I have to say that. Village. It takes a village.
All these things I had help with.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't just simply say that. But, and another thing about all of that, now that you mention all of this, is that in a sense, it's sort of sad that people would find something like that unusual.
Right.
Here's what I mean by that. You see, as African-American people, nobody is surprised when we can dance well and sing like Beyonce or play ball like LeBron James. But let me tell you something that happened when I was teaching I started teaching at Charleston Southern University. I was teaching a world history class. And first day class, I walked into the room, went straight to the board. There are about 45 students there. And I start talking about world history. And so I start writing on the board about Mesopotamia and Babylon and Gilgamesh and Hammurabi and all these type of things. And the students are there just like shocked. And I notice I'm not getting any reception from the students. So I go through all this motions and such. And after I've done that, I said, okay, so you will study chapter 1, pages so and so and so. And after I'm done with, I'm erasing the board, and this young black lady walks up to me and said, Professor Fordham? And I said, yes. And I said, what's your name? And she introduced herself, and I said, yes, what can I do for you? She said, you don't know what it does to see a black man just do what you did. And my response to that is, on one end, that's somewhat flattering and complimentary. But what I did that day was what I went to school for.
Right. Absolutely.
I was doing my job.
Absolutely.
Why would you consider a black man who is basically doing his job unusual? I almost wanted to say, have you forgotten who was the president at that time? Barack Obama, of course.
Yes.
But you see, this is what happens when, and let me give you another example of that. There's a film that I show in my African-American Studies class of Dr. Henry Louis Gates, a legitimate African-American historian. And I say that to distinguish him from the countless frauds that are out there on the internet now, who I will not bother naming.
Yes.
But, but he was showing how these ancient schools they had in pre-colonial Africa before the slave trade, and how they still have these old parchments from about 500 or 600 years ago that still exist in these places, and how they're working on translating them into English and so forth. Would you believe one young black girl burst out and cried in that class?
Wow.
When I showed them that. And I asked her to stay for a minute after class, and I asked her, well, why are you crying? And she said, Professor Fordham, I can't express things the way you do, but you don't know what it is to grow up here in Charleston all your life believing that you're nothing and incapable of these things, and then you see things like this. And I said, I get it. And what this all boils down to is this. So generations of us have been falsely taught that we are good with all things physical and of nothing mental. And that's the tragedy. And I understand where that comes from. Because you see, the reason that you have racism in the first place was that you had to maintain a permanent class of cheap labor.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you want to really get down to the roots of this, when the West African empires fell around the 1500s, you had them, they were colonizing the Western Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried to enslave the quote-unquote Native American Indian.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't go over very well. And Father Bartolomeu de Casa, under Columbus, he suggested that they use the African.
Mm-hmm.
You see? And so that went on. And then in 1527, ironically, the same Father Bartolomeu de Casa wrote a letter begging God to forgive him because he saw the tragic results of what he was doing.
Wow.
Too late, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So then in colonial Jamestown in 1619, you had the ship Man of War bringing in the first 20 Africans
Mm-hmm.
to use it on a permanent basis as slave labor. And you also had the white indentured servants
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
back then too.
Yes.
These were the poor whites of Western Europe who would be enslaved for 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would be free. These were people who had committed nonviolent crimes
Mm-hmm.
or that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem was that the power structure of colonial Virginia and other such places, they feared the closeness of these poor white indentured servants and these enslaved blacks.
Mm-hmm.
And a man by the name of Nathaniel Bacon in 1676 tried to get them together to rebel.
Yeah,
Bacon's Rebellion.
Yes, sir.
But he died of dysentery before that could go all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, they said, we can't have this happen again. So they phased out white indentured servitude.
Mm-hmm.
And they put more and more restrictions on the freedom and social mobility of the blacks.
Mm-hmm.
So you had basically divide and conquer of the poor.
Yes. Yes.
So that the rich could stay rich.
Yes.
And as Kwame Nkrumah, the founder of the modern nation of Ghana in 1957, said in his autobiography, racism did not cause slavery, slavery caused racism.
Mm. Wow.
And so in order to maintain a permanent class of cheap labor for slavery, you had to maintain a very low level of education.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to convince the people that they were fit for nothing but slavery.
Wow.
And it's amazing that in the midst of that, you had your W.E.B. Du Bois, your Frederick Douglass, your Booker T. Washington,
Mm-hmm.
and here in South Carolina, you had Elizabeth Evelyn Wright, the founder of Voorhees College,
Mm-hmm.
who herself was a student of the great Booker T. Washington,
Wow.
who once said that she wanted to be a greater woman as Booker T. Washington was greater man.
Mm.
And so she started Voorhees here in South Carolina to educate the youth of this state.
Wow.
And here's the thing about that. Any graduate of Voorhees who is listening to what I just said just now can tell you that story, because they make sure when they go to Voorhees, they tell them that story, how the mobs burned down her school twice, but yet she continued to move on.
Wow.
And that school is still there today.
Wow. That's
Okay.
amazing.
Well, yeah. And then you had the great Miss Septima Poinsett Clark, who, when I was a teenager, I saw her in a parade in Charleston, and the African Americans were like in reverence by this float. She had on a big, one of these queen staffs and a queen's regalia on in the parade, and the people were reverently just touching the float.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the same lady who taught in Johns Island for a little of no money, who survived the Charleston race riot in 1919. She was fired for teaching, fired as a teacher for belonging to the civil rights movement, and she sued for her right to get her back pay in the last 7 years of her life.
Wow.
And managed to get it. You see, and then, I can't forget this. The great Esau Jenkins from Johns Island, 4th grade education, had the Progressive Club, had the CO Credit Union, which he founded in 1966 and is still here over 40 years after his death.
Wow.
Martin Luther King's right-hand man in Charleston, where he actually was called the Martin Luther King of South Carolina. Okay? These are the things we need to tell our young people.
Yes.
Because these are the examples that you need to follow. Now, people will say that, well, yeah, that was good for them, but there ain't no more leaders like that now. Hold up. Let me say this to that. You know, I told you I teach world history too.
Yes, sir.
Right? Well, this morning I was talking about this man who was in China. And he was in China back during the days when they had what was called the Warring States. Everybody had daggers and swords and knives. And there was just mass murder all over the place. This man went around throughout China reciting the teachings of the ancestors, teaching them about humility, teaching them about decency, teaching them about modesty, teaching them how to be educated. But wherever he went, the leaders of China said, yeah, whatever, basically. Now, as he was doing this, young people were listening. And he went to his grave feeling that he was a failure. But the young people who listened to him, they got together and they went over what he taught them while he was alive, and they put them together in a book called the Analects. I'm talking about the man who in China they called the Master Kung, also known as Confucius.
Wow.
And 2,000 years later, most people in China and a lot of people all over the world can tell you what Confucius taught, but they can't tell you a thing about the kings who rejected their advice.
Wow.
Now, I say all that to say is that if you have knowledge that came from wise elders and you speak it, and young people or whoever don't immediately respond, always remember this. As long as you keep talking, someone will listen, but if you remain quiet, no one will.
Wow. Yo. Yo, so this, I told y'all I was geeking out, and this, okay, let me reset. This is Real Talk with ReZsaun. I'm your host, ReZsaun Lewis. So this is your first time watching. This is the Local Celebrity Spotlight. I'm interviewing Professor Damon L Fordham, who is an adjunct professor both at the Charleston Southern University as well as the Citadel. If you've been listening in, you've been hearing the wealth of knowledge. We haven't touched the tip of the iceberg for what this man knows, which is completely evident. And I just want to once again just thank you so much for coming on the show. Give me an opportunity to meet you and to hear these things, because it's so important that people understand this. It's so important that people understand that it takes a spark sometimes. Sometimes, like you said, it takes that Confucius that walks around and just drops those seeds of knowledge on people, not even realizing if it's going to go anywhere, but you plant a seed and walk away, as the Bible says. The Bible says that one man planted, one man watered, but God gets the increase. And
exactly.
That's definitely a principle that I believe in following. Let's move into your books.
Okay.
So you say you've written 3 books and you have a 4th one on the way.
That's correct.
So let's work through the books. I got a little time, so I'd love to.
No, we're fine.
No, I mean, like I want to go through this and really give people an opportunity to fully understand. So your first book,
it's called True Stories of Black South Carolina.
Okay.
And the essence of it is that over the years, when I was involved with radio and newspapers and such, I've also written things for the Charleston Chronicle as well as the News and Courier, now Post and Courier, and various other such things. I decided to collect them into book form in 2007. And so the first book came out in 2008. It included the story that I just told you about Septima Clark. It told about the day that Martin Luther King came to Charleston on July the 30th, 1967. It told of the story of Samuel Smalls, who was the real Porgy that inspired Porgy and Bess, as well as a number of others like that. And it was very well received. I did a number of television appearances, and it continues to sell very well to this day, I might add. And the reason I think it did well is because I don't usually go over the same ground that everyone else does.
Yeah.
I try to do research constantly because I love it, number one. And secondly, because I want to tell the stories that hardly anyone else hears. You see, a lot of people call themselves scholars and researchers, but all they do is Google on the internet. That is not scholarship, and that is not research, because anybody can put junk on the internet.
Yes.
And if you are not schooled in cross-referencing, learning how to separate the truth from the trash,
Yes.
then you can just forget it. all you're doing is exploiting people when you do that. If you have to know how to go into a library, go into an archive, go through historical journals that are not often seen by the general public and who are not, that it's not on the internet. Go through old newspapers with long forgotten stories and things like that. Then while you're doing that, you talk to some of the old people whose stories whose stories need to be rescued. Otherwise, they would go where the vast majority of good stories go, forever lost in the graveyards. That's research. That's scholarship. And the problem is that a lot of people who do that do so on such an academic level that they don't reach the average Jane or the average Joe who needs to know this stuff.
Absolutely.
And see, that's what I try to do, to get it down to the average Jane and the average Joe. Because remember what I said earlier about vaccinating the mind with the positivity to make them immune to the negativity?
Yes.
Well, that's what I'm about.
Wow. So the first book, South Carolina.
True Stories of Black South Carolina.
True Stories of Black South Carolina. Okay. So transition to your second book.
Okay. Well, I had a lot of leftover material from that. And so in 2009, I did a sequel called Voices of Black South Carolina, which is one of my personal favorites in that it told a story that is seldom told about how, most people think that when they started segregation, that we just rolled over like bumps on a log. And that is not true. I talked about how the great Robert Smalls, Thomas Miller, who's the founder of South Carolina State, William J. Whipper, who's the great-great-grandfather of Seth Whipper, judge in North Charleston, and people like that. When Benjamin Tillman tried to put the Jim Crow and segregation laws in South Carolina, these men stood tall, along with two white representatives, T.E. Dudley of Marlboro and J. Harleston Reed of Georgetown, and to fight them from passing the segregation laws. But it was only 8 of them in the state legislature and 154 who were in favor of segregation.
Of course.
But when they passed that law, Robert Smalls got up in the state legislature and said that before I sign that rag of a new constitution, I will walk home to Beaufort.
Wow.
People also don't know that during the Reconstruction days after the Civil War, South Carolina had 2 black lieutenant governors, Alonzo Jacob Ransier from Pitt Street, in downtown Charleston, and Richard Howell Gleaves. And they served from 1870 to 1876. And Richard Howell Gleaves served under Franklin Jacob Moses, the first Jewish governor of South Carolina. Only time in American history you had a Jewish governor and a black lieutenant governor. And it was under them that from 1873 to 1877, the University of South Carolina was the only integrated campus in the entire Deep South.
Wow.
These things I found out by going through archives and old records that are not commonly known. And I wanted to put this stuff out there to the people. And they also didn't know that whenever you had these race riots back into the 1800s and early 1900s, the people fought back. It's not like how you see on Hollywood, or to give you an example that's not in the book, but I'm working on a project with this now. You hear about Black Wall Street, right?
Yeah.
What do you hear about? Tell me what you usually hear about Black Wall Street.
The government sent in the National Guard, I believe it was, and they burned it down. They bombed it. It was like a 72-hour period that they pretty much took it down.
Okay, that's the kind of stuff you hear on the internet.
Yes.
Disregard any of that garbage.
Okay.
Here's the real story, okay?
Yes, sir.
The real story about that, because I'm reading it right now, was that a man named Dick Rowland, who was 19 years old, he was in the elevator in Tulsa. And he happened to trip over a white lady. I believe her name was Sarah Page. And so she screamed. And so this got blown out of proportion and he was arrested. Now, Tulsa was a wealthy city because of the oil. And a lot of the black people were into that too. So they had their own law offices, movie theaters, banks, etc., and so forth. All of that is true. But here's what's not often told about that. When Dick Rowland was arrested, a white mob came there to lynch him. But guess what? Black World War I veterans, led by Obie Mann and Horace Pegleg Taylor, who lost part of his leg in World War I, they led a posse of 50 to 75 black men to the Tulsa jail to protect Dick Rowland.
Wow.
And so when the white men saw these black men coming there with their guns and all that for self-defense, the white man went up to Obi Man and said, "Excuse me, but I'm sure you understand the context of this. Nigga, what are you doing with that gun?" Mm-hmm. And Obi Man said, "I'm going to use it." And it was on. And so the black men eventually began to lose the battle because of numbers. And so they went back into Deep Greenwood, aka Black Wall Street. Mm-hmm. And so the whites chased them back there, and Pegleg Taylor still had his posse, and he was picking them off one by one, pow, 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 pow. And that is what led the whites to say, okay, we got to flush these folks out. Okay. And that's when they burned Deep Greenwood. You see? Wow. And so after they destroyed Deep Greenwood, the mayor wanted to confiscate the land and sell it to developers. But there was an African-American lawyer named B.C. Franklin, a.k.a. Buck Franklin. And Buck Franklin sued the city to prevent them from taking away these people's land. And guess what? He was successful. Wow. And within about 2 years, those African-Americans rebuilt Deep Greenwood. Wow. Black Wall Street. The great Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois came to Tulsa in 1926 and told the Crisis magazine that he said, "Black Tulsa, I take off my hat and salute to you." Wow. How do I know this? A black lady named Mary Jones Parrish, survived this and wrote a book called Events of the Tulsa Disaster, mm-hmm. where she interviewed people who were there and talked about this, and she wrote about Buck Franklin and Pegleg Taylor and all of this. And there are several other good books about it. One's called Ride and Remembrance, and another one's called The Burning by Tim Madigan. These books tell you the truth about all of that. Mm. If you read that garbage that you mm-hmm. and that trash that you see on these stupid memes on Facebook and all that, they'll have you believing, oh, gloom, despair, and agony on me. You know, all these terrible things happen to us. Woe is us. No, you don't even bother with that junk. Go to the library. Read about this stuff. Find the truth about it and teach it to people out there so they'll know that things are not hopeless. Because you see, as Proverbs 23:7 puts it, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. There you go. Mm-hmm.
There it is. Wow. Yo, y'all are getting all of I don't know if y'all nerding out like I am. I'm sorry. I'm nerding out. It's cool. I'm with it. That one thing encompasses so much of what's wrong with the world. And I didn't even mean to go here, but I would like to find out, and we're going to come back to the book, to the third book, definitely. Mm-hmm. But I would like to get your view as to what's happening right now. There's a lot of talk going on in the Low Country and in the world about the state of affairs, not only of the Black community, but of where we're headed as a city, as a state, and as a nation. What are your thoughts in regards to the things that you're seeing going on around you right now?
Well, there are a lot of people that feel that we are in the last days of the American Republic. This is what I have to say about that. You know, I've studied and I teach about Egypt, Rome, and Greece, and all the others. And you might remember, if you've studied science, Sir Isaac Newton and the law of gravity, which goes, what goes up must come down, which is true. There was a time when the sun never set on the British Empire. And when Martin Luther King went there in 1964, he said, today it barely rises on it. It's true that happens, but here's the reality behind that. What we see in America now is nowhere near as bad as it could be or once was.
Yes.
You see, this is what happens when you don't know history. You know, people forget that between 1861 and 1865, this nation went to war against itself over the issue of slavery. And after that, there were massive gun battles and hangings and such throughout the South when African Americans were trying to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And then not only did you have the civil rights movement, but in the late 60s, you had radical groups bombing buildings
Mm-hmm.
and shooting people and all of that, and riots in the streets, burning down almost whole cities and things of the sort. You know, what's happening today is nowhere near anything like this.
Agreed.
Okay? We do not have political assassinations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yes, there are people getting killed in police brutality cases, and there are policemen being killed and all of that, but it's not the whole organized internal terror cells that you saw back in the late 60s and early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's nothing like the Weathermen or anything like that going on today. So, but the problem is everything is perception. If enough people believe that our society is being destroyed and going downhill, you know, again, as a man thinketh, so is he, then eventually it will. Yeah. But here's what you have to remember about that. Whenever a society actually went downhill, the killer in it was when you had such things like in ancient Rome. Mm-hmm. The senators in ancient Rome, they were bringing daggers to the Senate, and they were bribing the army against each other on political sides. Right. And once the army turns against the government, that's when you know it's all over. Mm-hmm. Right. That's not happening anytime anywhere near soon. Right. And so when the army went against the government, that's when the Vandals and the barbarians and all of them can take over, because once a nation is destroyed from within, then it's easy to be taken over from without. We are in all actuality a long way with that. Yeah. Now, what's the moral of that story? It's good to study our history as a people so you can separate the truth from the trash, but it's also important that you study the history of the world. Yes. So that you can understand how you fit into that picture from a wider point of view than what you hear on the street corner and the barbershop.
Wow. Wow. That is so good. Man, that's so good. That is so good. So, and I don't want to take you to a place that,
we're good.
We're good. Okay, cool. We're good. So we can talk. All right, good. Yeah. All right, so as far as we have the things going on, i.e., the Black Lives Matter. We have the Colin Kaepernick protest. We have things like the Know Your Rights campaign. We have Trump's America that is what I think has just been a buried thing that's been brought to light as opposed to a thing that's like new. Right. But what is your take on the way people see? And because my take on a lot of this is that people have become way too comfortable being way too racist openly. Like, I think that is something that had went away for a while, but now it's starting to creep its way back in Trump's America. What do you think about the overt racism that used to maybe be covert racism that is creeping back into the mainstream society?
Well, if you were paying attention, it never went away. I mean, all you had to do was listen to right-wing talk radio, that hardcore stuff. Yeah, yeah. And, I mean, that was there all along. Yeah. But you see, again, people deal with things on the surface. They don't go deep within the stuff. Right. That stuff was nothing new. Mm-hmm. You heard how a lot of the criticism of the last president was very unnecessary. Definitely. Some of it was mean. So that was nothing new. You know, you had Donald Trump as far back as the early 2000s saying that these guys who were supposedly involved with the Central Park thing should be executed and all of that. Mm-hmm. Where did it go away? Yeah. I mean, the only thing is that the internet makes a lot of things more apparent to people who weren't paying attention before. Wow. Yeah. It's just that simple. Yeah, yeah. And as for the issue of Black Lives Matter, when Muhammad was alive, I used to, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about.
All right, Bimo.
Okay, Muhammad Dibaha was the leader of the Black Lives Matter movement here in Charleston from 2014 until he was killed in New Orleans last February the 6th, 2016. Yeah. 2018, excuse me. And he and I used to talk all the time about the danger of movements like this kind following the disastrous path of SNCC and the Black Panther movement and the Black Liberation Army and all these movements. Mm-hmm. They all were destroyed not only externally, but internally,
Yeah.
because of fratricide and egoism and the fact that you had these very young people going up against forces that they often didn't understand.
Right.
You see, because there was one incident back in the days when Minister Farrakhan was giving them a lecture, and he said, well, if you talk about revolution and taking over the government, let me ask you one thing. With what? You know? And basically, he and I would talk about these things. And the problem with a lot of young movements is that they get caught up in these issues of egoism and personalities and things that they're just not really ready to handle. And now that he's gone, I really don't know what direction Black Lives Matter is moving in nowadays. I don't hear a lot about them.
I've thought about
read their website, and a lot of it was filled with a lot of these academic leftist cliches about patriarchy and so forth. And I'm like, okay, well, hopefully they can get their act together and come to a more cohesive direction very soon. I'd like to see it. But my advice to any youth movement is study what happened to the youth movements of the past and build on their success and avoid their mistakes. Now, Colin Kaepernick. Well, the thing is, he never set himself up to be a leader of any movement or anything like that. Basically, as far as I'm concerned, he just did what a lot of kids did when I went to school. We went to school with Jehovah's Witnesses that for their own personal reasons didn't salute the black religious person. Right. So it's like, okay, and because the Supreme Court declared in Barnett versus West Virginia back in 1943 that you didn't have to stand or recite the pledge if it was against your principles. So you did that. And, okay, and what's happening is that a lot of people saw, and he didn't seek attention by doing this. Remember, they start, they start paying attention to the fact that he wasn't doing it. And it kind of got way overblown from there. So, but then again, I understand it because you see, these are times of confusion, and there's a lack of leadership and a lack of direction. So people want to latch on to someone who they see as a martyr for their cause. So I get that. As far as him, and where he takes it, I mean, that's entirely up to him, of course. But if he wants to, if this is his way of drawing attention to the issue, fine. But then we have to ask ourselves, then what? Into making what he's protesting against a reality. And so that's where, the answer should come from next. Now, President Trump. Okay, I just have one thing to say about that. If you're mad, vote.
If you're mad with President Obama, don't boo, vote. That's what the man said.
The election is coming up on November the 6th to determine who is, the majority in the Senate and the House of Representatives. If you don't like what he's doing, vote for the people who are against him to blunt if you don't like the things that he's saying and the things that he's doing. And then more importantly, organize to register to vote in 2020. Okay? But right now, on the other side, I see just so much confusion and a lack of cohesion and everything. But, hopefully they can get together before then. But something? This is where studying the those who came before you came in comes in. Now, George Washington. Now, of course, some people say, well, he was a slave owner. Yes, he was. But he wasn't wrong about everything. In his final address, he warned the American people, do not get caught up into political parties, because that would be the division and the downfall of a nation. And he was right. Don't you know that every year in the House of Representatives, they recite the farewell speech of George Washington that included what I just said. And they listen, they clap, well, they hear, but they don't listen. Because he warned against sectional divisions. And had they listened to that, they wouldn't have had the Civil War. Okay? And he warned against involvement in foreign wars. They didn't listen to that, and you see where that happened. Okay? And he warned, don't get caught in the division of political parties. Need I say more? So even though to see, the thing about it is, there's a saying that I think best fits that. A broken clock is right at least twice a day.
Yes, it is.
Need I say more?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Yes, it is.
So the thing is, President Trump is not going to be president forever.
Mm-hmm.
But it is up to you to use your power to do something about it if you're upset.
If you're upset with it, yes.
Now, of course, there are people who say, well, we voted, but he still got in. Hold up. See, that's where you need to study and understand how this thing about the Electoral College works. And this is where I blame people like myself in that. Because we didn't do, those of us who know these things did not appreciate the lack of understanding that a lot of people have about politics.
Yes.
Back when I was registering people to vote when President Obama was running, you know, they would tell me, man, Mr. Fordham, I can't vote. I've been to jail. I said, no, but see, if you committed a misdemeanor, you have nothing to worry about.
Right.
If you're committed a felony, you just have to be out of that whole system and you can vote. They didn't know that.
Wow.
But then after the election, they would come to me and say, how come you didn't tell me I had to vote for the senator and the governor and all this other stuff? And I thought you knew that.
Yeah, I was assuming you
So we have So we have to do a better job in teaching the masses of people this stuff because see, back when we first began voting in large numbers, people went out and voted. But then we were taught wrongly to put all our eggs in the basket of one party, which led to one party ignoring us and another taking us for granted. Malcolm said in a speech that he gave at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City on June the 28th, 1964, that you don't do that. You keep quiet who you're going to vote for. You let both of them come to you to promise, and then you strategically decide before the election. Keep them guessing so they will both fight for your vote. Because of one, you vote for one person, group of people all the time, one will ignore you and the other will take you for granted, and neither can promise you anything because they know you're going to vote.
That's right.
Words of wisdom.
Wow. And that's something I actually talk about with my coworkers quite often is I believe that the political party system has really ruined our country in so many ways.
It did.
Especially when you consider the things that we saw what was happening in especially the last 2-3 years of Obama's presidency, when they pretty much were trying to block everything for no other reason than the fact that we're not supporting a Democratic president. Like that was such an issue. And I think that that's extended itself in a world where Fox News and CNN and MSNBC have pretty much bunkered their core audience in, and now you only listen to people who think like you. And I no longer have to listen to anybody.
That's not good for the country.
It's not good at all. That's
not good because, see, I can't remember who said it, but there's a good saying about that. The left wing and right wing are parts of the same bird. Because I've dealt with so much phoniness and hypocrisy from people on both sides of the thing. I mean that, you really got to think before you vote. And for years of us following that bad and slavish advice from people who were paid to mislead us has gotten us into the situation where the last 2 generations are apathetic. The solution is simple, folks. People always tell me, well, I don't know nothing about politics. I say, hold up. If you can tell me who's in the running for the Super Bowl or the NBA finalists and all that sort of thing, you know that stuff because you take time to study that stuff. You need to study politics. You need to watch the news and basically make wise decisions before you vote. Now, I understand not everybody's political, okay? But if you are going to complain about these kind of things and so forth, you need to be a participant.
Agreed.
Okay?
Agreed.
It's just that simple.
Wow. I could do this like all night. I promise you I could. Let me get back on topic. But thank you so much for going there with me because I wanted to pick your brain on those things. So thank you so much. The third book. Let's talk about that.
Mr. Potts and Me. It was written between 1991 and it was finally published in 2014.
Okay.
Now here's the story behind that. Okay, as a kid, I was a bookworm. I was very uncoordinated, and everybody around, for the most part, thought I was strange. And my dad believed in me. He understood my love of reading and so forth. And there was an elderly man by the name of Walter Snipe in our community. You know Shakur Francis, right?
Mm-hmm.
His great-grandfather.
Wow.
He raised my mother after her grandfather died. You see? So these two men were my role models. They were my heroes. Walter Snipe, we called him Papa, and he kept this huge array of books in his tool shed that I was reading constantly. And my dad was always telling me these stories about his experiences and history and all that. And I love to talk to old folks because they told me interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
Remember I told you about Confucius earlier?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that drew me to Confucius was that he said in the Analects that if you ever go to a gathering, leave after the last elder leaves.
Because all the wisdom's gone.
You got it.
Yes, sir.
So my dad died relatively young, and Papa died when I was 8 years old. So I visited my dad's grave on the 7th anniversary of his death on Valentine's Day, 1991. And I thought, wouldn't it be a shame if all those stories went to the grave with my father?
Mm-hmm.
And he left behind his autobiography and some diaries and things. So I took all of that and my memory of his stories and created the story about this lonely kid who's bullied and everybody thinks he's weird and all of this. And this old man who I fused my dad and Papa into was Mr. Ernest Monroe Potts, this wise old man who takes this kid under his wing and tells him all these stories about his history and heritage and all that, and takes him into manhood. That became Mr. Potts and me.
Wow. That sounds amazing. And so I'd imagine all these books are definitely for sale.
Yes.
Amazon,
they're on Amazon. They're at Buxton Books locally at number 2 Cumberland Street also. And you could also get them at Barnes & Noble. If they don't have it in stock, they can order it for you.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Awesome. So the last thing I want to make sure I talk about, the coup de grace, if you will, the Mojo Art Show. The one-man show. I definitely want to make sure.
Yeah, that's on October the 1st at 6 p.m. at 34 Prelude Street, downtown, at Waterfront Park. I'm going to be basically an hour. I'm going to tell the type of stories that I sometimes do in my tours as well as in my books. I basically tell a lot of these same type of stories that we're talking about, but I'm very animated when I actually tell these stories.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of voice inflections and acting into it and so forth. And so that's what you're going to see for an hour Monday night, as well as my harmonica playing.
Wow.
As you probably know, I also play the chromatic harmonica, the same kind that Stevie Wonder plays.
Okay.
So all of that's going to be integrated into that, and I will have my books out there for a signing. It's free. The books aren't free.
The books are not free.
But I'm happy to sign them. And it'll be Monday night, 6 to 7 p.m., October the 1st, 2018. And I'd be more than happy to see you out there. And bring your kids, for they will be educated.
Bring your kids, for they will be educated. If nothing else, you better know they will be educated, because, if you sat in, and we've been on, I don't know how long we've been on right now. I haven't been keeping track. I've just been so into this conversation. Normally I know a whole lot more about that. But anyway, I've just learned so much just sitting here during this period of time. Like I said, I could do this all night. I'll be respectful of everybody's time. I want to thank everybody who watched tonight. It's been an amazing, amazing show.
Well, I'll tell you what, just have me back.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. I definitely look forward to having you back on the show in many different formats. I'm actually going to extend an invitation for you to do something once we turn the camera off as well, that I'm working on. But I want to thank you so much for this.
Well, I can truly say the pleasure is all mine.
Wow. Thank you so much. Damon L Fordham, Professor Damon L Fordham, adjunct professor at both CSU and the Citadel. He's doing a one-man show at 52?
No, it's 34
Prelude Street. So I'm not as good with the numbers as you are. I'm going to get there, though. 34 Prelude Street, downtown Charleston.
Right, and I also do local tours, too, through both Buxton Books and on my own.
And how will they get in touch with you as far as getting a tour?
Well, the tours, that's at 843-723-1670.
Okay, 843-723-1670.
Right, they can call and reserve a tour.
All right, cool. So if you want a tour of downtown?
Yes,
all right,
a walking tour.
All right, cool. That sounds like we might get our boys on that, because we're always looking for good.
Sure.
Definitely. Thank you. Anything that you want to say before we close?
Well, here's the thing. A lot of times, a lot of people say there are no great leaders today, and they wish for another Marcus Garvey or Dr. King or Malcolm or Medgar Evers. The solution to that is not as difficult as you think. Jesus is no longer as a physical man walking the earth, but we know what he said because the preachers and the Christian church teach us from the Bible. The Prophet Muhammad is no longer physically walking with us in human form on the earth, but the Muslim imams teach us that through the Quran. So Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Medgar Evers, all of them, even Rosa Parks herself, among others, they all left behind instructions. They all left behind books. If you want to know what they would say in a situation, go and read them.
Wow.
And then you incorporate some of that into your personality and adapt that through a modern situation. And if you're not much of a reader, many of these people, you can find their speeches on YouTube. And so those of us who are scholars, we have a duty to take that stuff just as the preachers, just as the imams, and bring it to the people.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bring the kids. They will be educated October 1st. If you liked what you heard here, if you loved what you heard here, please, please, please find Damon L Fordham. How can they find you on the internet? Do you do the internet thing?
I'm on Facebook, as well as my under my name, Damon L Fordham, as well as my YouTube channel, which is called The American Storyteller, after my 4th upcoming book.
Word. And how soon can we expect that?
About a year.
About a year. Okay, cool. So before you get that out there, we'll definitely have you back on.
No problem.
All right. I love it. I love it. And as you guys know, this has been Real Talk with ReZsaun. I truly have been honored to be a part of this interview, even though I'm conducting the interview. Like, I felt like a kid, like in a candy store. If you know me, you know how much I love this now. We do this every Wednesday from 7 to 7:30 normally, but we got started late today. And this is maybe this is probably my favorite. Sorry, Cleo. I love you, Cleo. This is probably my favorite. Sorry, Cleo. You know I love you, Cleo Brown. You know Cleo Brown.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I wrote the book review for Witness to the Truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she's like, that's my lady. I love
Understood.
I love you, Cleo. This is my favorite. Like, dead serious. Just anyway. Local Celebrity Spotlight, we do this every Wednesday from 7 to 7:30. I love you too, Pastor Dixon. You know you my dude. You know you my dude. 7 to 7:30. We do this every Wednesday night. Next Wednesday, I think I have Crystal Simmons. Yes, Crystal Simmons, who's running for District 117, SC District 117 House of Representatives. She's a good friend of mine. She's coming on to share her platform with you guys so that you can know what she's got coming up. And also, on Sundays from 7 to 8, sports, music, politics, you name it, we'll discuss it. There's so much to talk about. There's so much going on in the world, and I'm excited about bringing that to you. There's so many things going on, but I'm so glad to be able to share these stories and share these opportunities and shine a light on the great people in our local area who are doing great things, such as Professor Damon L Fordham. Thank you so much once again.
You're very welcome.
All right, and as you guys know, if a man doesn't stand up for something, he is bound to fall for anything. Get out, Charleston. Peace.